Hello and welcome back to the Ash and Stone channel. My name is Chris and today I'll be taking you through how I'm painting my Oathmark Orc Heavy Infantry. I start off with a black undercoat. It's generally how I prefer to paint as I find it more forgiving than a white or grey undercoat. If you miss bits, it doesn't matter, and if your subsequent coats are a little patchy, it doesn't look as washed out. Lighter colours may take a little bit more to build up, but these guys are going to be pretty dark, so that's a non-issue. On top of that black undercoat, I'm going to use Vallejo light grey green to paint all of the areas of skin. I want to go with a dark grey, almost black skin with a slightly green tint, so this is a great place to start. It'll require 2 coats to build up a consistent colour. While I wait for the first coat to dry, I'll put a coat of Vallejo dark sea grey on the figure's trousers. I like to keep the trousers simple, neutral and fairly dark in order to trick the eye away from them and towards the brighter parts of the model, such as the base and the upper extremities. I also use a few different greys throughout the unit just to vary things up a bit and make them a little bit less uniform. This will also require 2 coats to build up the colour. With the skin now dry, I use Army Painter Speed Paint Grim Black to shade and define the skin. This adds nice deep shadows and darkens the whole skin tone, giving me that nice dark mid-tone I'm looking for that I can then highlight when the speed paint dries. Which does take a little bit, so in the meantime I hit the trousers with a generous wash of Army Painter Dark Tone. This adds in the shading we need in the folds and recesses to help define those features. While they both have a similar effect, choosing between the speed paint and the wash is ultimately about the result you're after. The speed paint will darken the entire surface by a significant amount, while the wash will concentrate in the recesses, leaving a brighter finish on the high points. With the speed paint now dry, I go back to the Vallejo light grey green and highlight the skin. This is focused on the details of the face, such as the nose, upper lip, cheeks and chin, to really pull those details out from the dark shadows. It's also applied to the fingers and upper points of the hand, and used to define the muscles on the arms, by painting the upper surfaces of said muscles, and leaving the dark shadows and mid-tone in and around the recesses. To finish off the face, I need to paint the eyes, and I start them off with a line of black. You want to use a fairly fine brush and a steady hand to paint a horizontal line across the eye. To help me paint such small details more accurately, you'll see my hands hold the figure much more securely than they have been, and I'll brace my right hand with the brush against my left and the figure to reduce the amount of movement between them. What you won't see on camera though is that I've also brought my hands closer to my body and I've locked my elbows down beside my ribs to really anchor them in place and prevent as much unwanted movement as possible. You might even rest your forearms on the table before you to get as steady as you can. This is followed up with a little white, which gets dotted either side of the eye. I find it best to only have a little paint on the brush to limit the size of any mistakes and to dot them in using a small vertical line. Even if they're not perfect, I reckon they give the miniature a lot of life. Now I move on to the cloth, and for these I use a selection of 3 browns. Vallejo's Beige Brown, Armour Brown, and Beastie Brown. For the first figure here, I use Beige Brown to base coat the tunic, 2 coats to get a solid colour. I like to mix up the colours in a unit like orcs that are not wearing any particular uniform, to give them a really ragtag, disorganised vibe. But if you're painting every figure in a different colour like I have done in the past with say the militia, it can take a longer time to get things painted. So I've found that 3 colours, which you can mix and match on and between different parts of each model, gives a good variety, without adding a huge amount of time to the process. If you really want to speed things up, paint in batches of 5 or so, and do them all with the same colour, and then change for the next 5. In this case, I just vary it up through the batch, painting Armour Brown on some, and Beastie Brown on others. When they're all based, the Army Painter Strong Tone comes out, and this is used to wash those areas of brown to shade the recesses. Then it's a case of going back in with the base colour and tidying things up. I repaint most of the surfaces, just leaving the wash in the recesses. This cleans up any excessive blotchiness from the wash and sets us up with a good base for the next step, the highlighting. To get a highlight colour, I mix a little Vallejo Iraqi sand into the beige brown till I get a colour I like. This is used to pick out the high points and applied roughly along the bottom edge of the cloth to help sell the look of a raggedy worn edge. There's no hard and fast rule for how much Iraqi sand you mix in. I just try and mix up a colour that's noticeably lighter than the base, but isn't too stark a difference. It wants to look like it belongs there rather than sticking out too much. I repeat these two steps with the other two browns, reapplying the base colour and then highlighting with a little Iraqi sand mixed in. From there I move on to the leather and wood, using my typical processes. We start with Vallejo chocolate brown, which is applied to all of the areas of leather and the hafts of the weapons. Don't forget the shoulder straps like I did, you'll just have to go back and do it all later. One coat is generally sufficient here. Any thin areas or patchiness ranges from not mattering at all to being an advantage here. I use Vallejo flat earth on the leather, but rather than applying this as a regular highlight, I roughly splatter it on, focusing mainly on areas of the leather that would be worn, so outside edges, toes of the boots and such. We're trying to give the leather a lived-in look, where it's been rubbed against things or flexed or scratched, and it's worn through the top dyed or oiled layers to the raw leather beneath. Do orcs bother dyeing or oiling their leather? Probably not, but it helps to make their equipment look used. So the next step is Vallejo dark sand, which is used sparingly on the extreme edges or scratched lightly onto the surface, exposing that previously mentioned raw leather beneath. This is also a really good way of making the leather pop from the darker skin or cloth around it, as a rough, light line of dark sand across the edge of the bracer or strap really defines that shape. There's one step left to finish off the leather, but before we do that, I'll grab some more beige brown to highlight the wood. This is applied in long strokes down the shaft, settled down, to simulate the grains of the wood. Fine lines are better, but with the rough carving and angular surfaces of the wood, the next step will hide a lot of sins if your lines are on the thicker side. Which is Army Painter's strong tone. This is applied liberally across the areas of leather and wood and achieves two goals for us. Firstly, it shades the recesses, adding definition to the shapes of the leather and wood, which I've largely been ignoring thus far. And secondly, it ties the colours on the leather together. The three colours of the leather are quite starkly different, and the wash just helps to unify them. When that dries, it's all our matte surfaces sorted, so we give the models a blast with Tamiya Flat Clear to remove any shine, typically from the washes, and to help protect the paintwork. I also find this helps to make the colours pop. Without it, things kind of blur together a little, but after the flat clear, I think things look really well defined. Now we're on to the metallics, and I'm going to start with the iron or steel. I use Vallejo Natural Steel as my base colour, as it's a dark, kind of rough metallic, and it's applied as an uneven layer over the areas of metal. I don't see orcs taking a lot of time to polish up the equipment they produce, or loot, so I want the steel to be dark and black, like it's raw from the forge. So, ignoring the bronze for a second, I got a little carried away, I give the steel a coat of Army Painter's Speed Paint Grim Black to get that forge blackened look. The speed paint works well to darken the metallic without making it completely black, and it also leaves a brighter, not bright, but brighter edges where the dark oxides would be worn off somewhat. I use Vallejo steel in areas where those oxides would be completely removed, such as nicks or scratches, or weapon edges that have been sharpened. Roughly applied in small strokes, it gives the equipment a battered and worn look. As a bonus step, I use a little AK Interactive Light Rust as a bit of a wash to add a rust effect to recesses and rivets on the steel. wiping off any excess with my finger so it's not too overpowering. I just want to add a little bit of extra neglect to the steel, not turn it completely orange. The oxides from the forge will do a reasonable job of protecting the steel from rust. Let's go back in time to where I applied the Citadel Warp Block Bronze to the areas I want to be, well, bronze. I find that this is another great way of adding more disorganised chaos to the unit, rather than having everyone with the same steel equipment. Who knows from what strange far-flung lands or tombs these orcs have armed themselves from. So I paint the scale armour, the occasional helmet, and some of the greaves with Warp Block Bronze. Back to the present, and it's time to highlight that bronze, and for this I use Vallejo Bright Bronze. Bronze. This is carefully dry brushed onto the areas of bronze plate, the helm and greaves, before being unevenly painted onto the scale armour, and around the edges of those bronze plates. When painted onto the plates, it's applied much like the Vallejo steel was, to imitate scratches and to help define the edges. To add a little bit of weathering, I roughly apply a little Citadel Nihilak oxide to the areas where plates join, like the cheek plates of the helmet or around rivets, and roughly splatter some on a few of the scales of the armour. This all adds to that slightly neglected feel. To finish the bronze off, I add a rough splattering of Army Painter Strong tone to a few random areas, adding tarnish to the metal. Is all this extra weathering necessary? Nope, but it does look good and it's hardly difficult or particularly time consuming. From there we are ready for basing, and I apply my usual soil grout mix, which gives us a nice fine pre-coloured soil texture. When that's dry, I paint the base rim black, giving the model a nice tidy border or frame, and then add static grass using my special applicator. If you want to know more about that, there is sure to be a link around here somewhere. I add a bit more variety to the bases by using the occasional homemade static grass tuft, and then a little Woodland Scenics fine turf to add a different texture and colour to the base. That gets glued down with a little watered down PVA mixed with a drop of liquid soap. The soap causes the glue to soak in really well instead of just beading up on top. And there we are, all done, looking ready to ruin some poor peasant's day. A big thank you to my supporters on Patreon. Your support is always very much appreciated, and thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have found this useful. Let me know what you think or how you are doing yours differently in the comments down below. And post some pickies on the Oathmark Facebook page, I want to see them. Anyway, we shall see you next time. Cheers.